Standing in the grand hall of what used to be our home, I watched my wife Vivienne arrange her court like some medieval queen preparing for an execution. The marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandelier, and every surface screamed money, old money, the kind that came with trust funds and summer houses in the Hamptons. "Eliot, darling," Vivienne said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she gestured to the mahogany table where a thick document waited like a coiled snake. "We need to discuss our arrangement." Trent Desmond, her family attorney, and what I now realized was much more than that, stood beside her with the kind of smirk that made me want to rearrange his perfectly sculpted face. His Italian suit probably cost more than most people made in a month, and he wore it like armor. Bianca, Vivienne's best friend and professional gossip distributor, perched on the antique settee with her phone already out, no doubt ready to broadcast whatever humiliation they had planned across their entire social network. "Arrangement?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "That's an interesting word for a marriage." Vivienne's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, Eli, always so dramatic. This is just business, pure and simple." She slid the prenup across the table toward me. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, heavy stock that probably cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. I flipped through the pages, my construction worker hands leaving slight smudges on the pristine white paper. "Let me get this straight," I said, looking up at the assembled tribunal. "After 3 years of marriage, you want me to sign away any claim to the estate, the investments, even the business I built with my own hands?" Trent stepped forward, his law school confidence oozing from every pore. "It's really quite standard, Warren. Your wife's family has significant assets to protect. Surely you understand the necessity of keeping things organized." The way he said my name, like it tasted sour in his mouth, told me everything I needed to know about how this crowd really saw me. Blue-collar boy who got lucky, married up, and now needed to be put back in his place. "Organized," I repeated, setting the document down carefully. "Right. And what happens if I don't sign this generous offer?" Vivienne's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the cold calculation underneath. "Then we'll have to pursue other options, legal separation, asset protection, that sort of thing. It could get messy." Bianca giggled from her perch, already typing furiously on her phone, probably updating the country club gossip network in real time. I looked around the room, at the oil paintings of Vivienne's ancestors, at the Persian rugs that cost more than most cars, at the woman I thought I knew wearing a stranger's face. 3 years of marriage, and it all came down to this moment in a room that suddenly felt more like a courtroom than a home. "You know what's funny about love?" I said, standing up and brushing imaginary dust off my jeans. "I always thought it wasn't taxable." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Vivienne's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table, and Trent's smirk faltered for the first time since I'd known him. "Eli," Vivienne said, her voice taking on a warning tone, "don't be ridiculous. Just sign the papers." I picked up the prenup, hefted its weight in my hands, then set it back down without opening it. "No." "No?" Trent sputtered, his composure cracking. "You can't just say no. There are legal ramifications here, financial consequences." "Consequences," I interrupted, walking toward the door. "Yeah, I'm sure there will be." I paused at the threshold, looking back at the 3 of them. Vivienne had gone pale beneath her expensive makeup, Bianca's mouth hung open like a fish gasping for air, and Trent looked like someone had just told him the bar exam was being administered in Swahili. "By the way," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket and checking the time, "you might want to call your accountant, Viv. I made some transfers this morning, just keeping things organized." The sound of Vivienne's sharp intake of breath followed me out into the night. I sat in my truck in the circular driveway, hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared back at the mansion. Every light blazed like they were having a party. But I knew better. They were probably scrambling, making phone calls, trying to figure out what I'd done and how to undo it. The truth was simpler than they could imagine. While they'd been planning their little ambush, I'd been doing my homework. 3 years of marriage to a woman who treated me like hired help had taught me a few things about protecting myself. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The mansion? Purchased with funds from my construction company, transferred to joint ownership the day we married. The investment accounts? Seeded with money I'd earned swinging a hammer before I ever met Vivienne Archer. The business itself? 100% mine, built from nothing with these scarred hands and a willingness to work 18-hour days. My phone buzzed. Text from Vivienne. "What did you do?" I typed back, "Kept what's mine." Another buzz, this time from Trent. "This is harassment. I'll have you arrested." I laughed out loud in the empty cab of my truck. Arrested for what? Moving my own money? Protecting my own assets? Good luck with that, counselor. A third buzz from a number I didn't recognize. Saw Bianca's posts. Call me. Chloe. My sister. Ex-cop, current private investigator, and the only person in my family who'd never been impressed by Vivienne's money or pedigree. I'd been avoiding her calls for weeks, knowing she'd see right through the facade I'd been maintaining. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, watching the mansion shrink in my rearview mirror. The Gothic architecture that had once seemed romantic now looked menacing, like something out of a horror movie. My phone rang as I hit the main road. Trent's name flashed on the screen. "Warren," he barked when I answered. "You need to reverse whatever you did tonight. Immediately." "Or what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Or we'll make your life very difficult, very public, very expensive." I could hear Vivienne in the background, her voice high and sharp with panic. Good. Let her sweat for once. "Trent," I said, my voice calm as lake water. "Let me explain something to you. I've been building things since I was 16 years old. Houses, businesses, relationships. And the thing about building something is, you learn how to tear it down too. Are you threatening me? Just sharing some construction wisdom. Have a good night." I hung up and turned off my phone. In the distance, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, following the same route I'd taken from the mansion. Black SUV, windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever was inside. Interesting. I took the next exit, winding through back roads toward the blue-collar bar where I used to drink before Vivienne decided it was beneath my new station in life. The SUV followed, staying back, but never losing sight of my taillights. The rusty anchor hadn't changed in 3 years. Same neon beer signs, same scarred wooden bar, same crowd of construction workers and mechanics who'd known me since before I had money to worry about. I parked under a streetlight and waited. The SUV drove past slowly, windows still up, then disappeared around the corner. But I'd gotten a glimpse of the driver, Trent's distinctive profile, probably thinking he was being subtle. My phone buzzed with another text from Vivienne. "We need to talk." I typed back, "No, we really don't." Then I turned the phone off completely and walked into the bar. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Tonight, I was going to have a drink with people who knew the difference between being rich and having worth. The rusty anchor smelled like sawdust and honest sweat, a sharp contrast to the perfumed air of Vivienne's world. I found Chloe at the far end of the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching ESPN with the dedication of someone who'd bet money on the game. "Well, well," she said without looking at me. "The prodigal brother returns to the land of the common folk." "Don't start," I said, sliding onto the stool beside her. "I've had enough lectures for one night." Chloe Warren, she'd kept our family name through 2 marriages and a career that had taken her from beat cop to private investigator, finally turned to look at me. Her eyes, the same green as mine, held a mixture of concern and "I told you so" satisfaction. "Bianca's been busy on social media," she said, pulling out her phone. According to her, you walked out on your wife over a simple financial arrangement, left her heartbroken and humiliated in front of her friends. Simple financial arrangement, I repeated, signaling the bartender for a beer. That's one way to describe a complete asset grab. What really happened, Eli? I told her everything. The prenup ambush, Trent's smug threats, Vivienne's cold calculation. Chloe listened without interruption, her cop instincts cataloging every detail. So what did you actually do with the money? She asked when I finished. Moved it to accounts they can't touch. The mansion's in my name, bought and paid for with my company's profits. The investment portfolio was seeded with money I earned before I ever met her. I just made sure the paper trail was crystal clear. Chloe nodded approvingly. Smart. But they're not going to take this lying down. That text about making your life difficult? They mean it. As if summoned by her words, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered, putting it on speaker so Chloe could hear. Mr. Warren? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News. We've received some information about your marriage to Vivienne Archer that we'd like to discuss with you. I looked at Chloe, who was already shaking her head. No comment, I said. We understand there are allegations of financial misconduct, possibly domestic issues. I hung up. The phone immediately rang again, different number. They're fast, Chloe said grimly. Professional fast. This isn't just Bianca running her mouth on social media. They've hired a PR firm. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivienne. Stop this now or it gets worse. I showed Chloe the message. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your wife just made a tactical error, she said. That's a threat in writing. Keep it. Over the next hour, my phone rang 6 more times. Reporters, bloggers, even someone claiming to be from a podcast about high society scandals. Each time I declined to comment, but I could feel the net tightening around me. They're trying to control the narrative, Chloe explained. Get their version out first, make you look like the bad guy, classic damage control. So what do? Fight back, but smart. What do you know about their secrets? I thought about it. 3 years of marriage, countless dinner parties, charity events, private conversations I'd been dismissed from but had overheard anyway. Vivienne's world was built on appearances, but underneath the polished surface, there were cracks. Vivienne's been borrowing money, I said slowly, from her parents, from friends. She's been trying to maintain a lifestyle that her trust fund can't actually support. How do you know? Late-night phone calls, bills she thought I didn't see. That prenup wasn't just about protecting her assets, it was about getting access to mine. Chloe leaned forward, interested. What else? Trent. He's not just her lawyer. I've seen them together when they thought no one was looking. Nothing I could prove, but the way they interact, there's history there. Personal history? The kind that would make his legal advice a lot less professional and a lot more personal. Chloe grinned, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had at 15, planning some elaborate prank on our older brother. Now we're talking. You have any evidence? Not yet, but I know where to get it. The next morning, I drove to my construction site on the outskirts of town. We were building a mixed-use development, condos, retail space, the kind of project that had made my company profitable enough to catch Vivienne's attention in the first place. Mick O'Brien, my foreman, was waiting for me with coffee and a knowing look. He'd worked for me since the beginning, back when we were a 2-man operation working out of a rented garage. Saw the news, he said without preamble. Channel 7 ran a piece about trouble in paradise for one of the area's prominent couples. Let me guess. I came off looking like a gold-digging opportunist. Something like that. They interviewed some of her friends. Real classy ladies, talking about how you never fit into their social circle, how you were always resentful of her family's success. I spit into the dirt. Her family's success. Right. There's more. They're saying you've been mismanaging company funds, mixing personal and business expenses, suggesting maybe the IRS should take a closer look at your books. That stopped me cold. My books were clean. I'd made sure of that from day one. But an audit would tie up my assets for months, make it impossible to operate the business. It was exactly the kind of pressure tactic Trent would recommend. "They want a war," I said. "Let's give them one." Mick's weathered face creased into a grin. "What do you need?" "Information. Trent Desmond drives a silver BMW license plate." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos until I found one from a charity event. "There. I need to know where he goes, who he sees, especially when he thinks no one's watching. I know a guy who does that kind of work. Discreet, professional." "Set it up. And Mick, this stays between us." "Goes without saying, boss." I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to Vivienne and her perfectly orchestrated campaign to destroy me. By evening, I'd made a decision. I drove to Trent's office building in downtown Manhattan, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that screamed success. His BMW was in the parking garage, right where I expected it to be. I found a spot with a clear view and settled in to wait. At 8:47 p.m., Trent emerged from the elevator with someone I recognized, Sierra, Vivienne's personal assistant. They were walking close together, her hand on his arm, both of them looking around nervously. I followed them to an upscale restaurant 6 blocks away, staying far enough back to avoid detection. Through the window, I watched them take a corner booth, heads bent together in intense conversation. Sierra pulled out a tablet, showing Trent something that made him nod approvingly. My phone had a decent camera with a zoom function. I managed to get several clear shots of them together, their body language suggesting this was far from a professional meeting. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to raise questions. They left the restaurant separately, Sierra first, then Trent 10 minutes later. I followed him back to the parking garage, then to a high-end apartment building on the Upper East Side. Not his address, according to the business card I'd kept from our wedding planning meetings. Interesting. I was about to leave when I saw movement in one of the lit windows on the 15th floor. 2 figures, embracing. One of them was definitely Trent. The other... I adjusted my phone's zoom and took several more photos. The woman had dark hair like Sierra's, but something about her posture looked familiar. Then she turned toward the window, and I saw her face clearly. Vivienne. I sat in my truck for a long time after that, staring at the photos on my phone. My wife in another man's apartment at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night. The same man who'd stood beside her that morning, helping her try to steal everything I'd worked for. The betrayal should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. They'd made this personal. They'd tried to destroy my reputation, my business, my life. Now I had ammunition to fire back. I drove home to the mansion, my mansion, whatever Vivienne might think, and found it dark and empty. Her car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't surprising given what I'd just witnessed. In my study, I uploaded the photos to my computer and studied them carefully. Clear shots of Vivienne and Trent together, timestamps showing when they were taken. Not explicit, but definitely incriminating for a woman who was trying to paint herself as the wronged party in our marriage. My phone rang. Chloe. "I've been doing some digging," she said without preamble. "Your wife's financial situation is worse than you thought. She owes money to at least 3 different people, plus she's been using credit cards to fund her lifestyle. The trust fund her parents set up has restrictions. She can't access the principal until she's 40, and the interest payments are barely covering her expenses." "How much does she owe?" "Conservative estimate? $250,000, maybe more." I whistled low. No wonder she'd been so desperate to get her hands on my assets. "There's something else," Chloe continued. "I ran a background check on Trent Desmond. Clean record, good reputation, but he's got his own money problems. Expensive divorce 2 years ago, alimony payments that are bleeding him dry. He needs a big score to get back on his feet. And helping Vivienne fleece me would qualify as a big score. Exactly. This isn't just about your marriage, Eli. It's about survival for both of them. After I hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, thinking. They'd started this war with a calculated attack designed to destroy me financially and socially. They'd underestimated me, assuming the blue-collar boy wouldn't know how to fight back in their world of lawyers and public relations. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning brought fresh attacks. Channel 7 ran a follow-up story featuring an interview with Bianca, who painted a picture of me as a controlling, financially abusive husband who'd isolated poor Vivienne from her friends and family. The piece included unflattering photos of me in work clothes, contrasted with glamorous shots of Vivienne at charity events. My phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. Reporters, curiosity seekers, even a few clients asking uncomfortable questions about my business practices. I let them all go to voicemail and focused on my own investigation. Mick's contact, a former cop named Danny Reeves, had been busy overnight. He'd confirmed what I'd seen at Trent's apartment building and added some interesting details. "Your wife's been visiting that apartment 3 times a week for the past month," Danny reported over coffee at a diner near my construction site. "Always evening hours, always stays late. The building has security cameras, but they're positioned to protect the residents' privacy, not document their activities." What about Trent's movements? Predictable. Office, gym, apartment with regular stops at that restaurant where you saw him with the assistant. He's also been meeting with a private investigator, guy named Kowalski, who specializes in asset searches and surveillance. That explained how they'd moved so fast with their media campaign. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. "I need more," I told Danny. "Something that proves they've been working together to defraud me." "That's harder. What you're talking about is conspiracy, and proving it requires evidence of planning and intent. You need documents, recorded conversations, something concrete." I thought about Sierra, Vivienne's assistant. She'd been with us for 2 years, privy to every detail of our personal and financial lives. If anyone knew about the conspiracy, it would be her. "What would it take to flip someone on the inside?" I asked. Danny grinned. "Depends on the person. Money, immunity, revenge, everyone's got a price. Question is, what's hers?" I spent the rest of the day thinking about Sierra Martinez, mid-20s, college-educated, working for barely above minimum wage because Vivienne was too cheap to pay her what she was worth. I'd seen the frustration in her eyes during staff meetings, the way she bit her tongue when Vivienne made unreasonable demands. That evening, I waited outside the building where Sierra lived, a modest apartment complex in Queens, the kind of place young professionals settled for when they couldn't afford Manhattan rents. She arrived home at 7:15, looking exhausted and carrying takeout from a chain restaurant. I approached her in the parking lot, hands visible and non-threatening. "Sierra, I'm sorry to bother you. I was hoping we could talk." She froze, takeout bag clutched against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Warren, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, just 5 minutes. I know you're caught in the middle of this, and I know it's not fair to you." Something in her expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, that I was acknowledging her position rather than demanding her loyalty. "5 minutes," she said finally, "but not here." We drove to a coffee shop in neutral territory, neither of us speaking until we were seated in a corner booth with our drinks. "I want you to know," I began, "that whatever happens between Vivienne and me, I don't hold you responsible. You're just doing your job." Sierra's laugh was bitter. "My job?" "Right. Do you know what my job actually involves, Mr. Warren?" I waited. Covering for her lies, making excuses to creditors, scheduling meetings with lawyers and accountants to figure out how to pay bills she can't afford. She hasn't paid me in 6 weeks, but she spent $3,000 on a handbag last Tuesday. The words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. 3 years of frustration and resentment finally finding an outlet. She's been planning this for months, Sierra continued. The prenup, the media campaign, everything. She and Mr. Desmond have been meeting regularly, going over strategies to maximize what she could get from you. Do you have any proof of that? Sierra hesitated, then pulled out her phone. I keep detailed calendars of all her appointments. It's part of my job. Look at this. She showed me a calendar app with entries going back 6 months. Meeting after meeting with Trent, often listed as TD strategy session or TD planning. The frequency increased dramatically over the past 2 months. There's more, she said quietly. She's been having me research your business finances, your personal accounts, even your family background. She wanted to know everything about your assets and how to access them. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of being complicit in something that's wrong, and because she's planning to blame me if any of this goes sideways. I've seen the emails she's been sending to Mr. Desmond about containing potential leaks and managing staff liability. I felt that cold calculation settling in my chest again. They weren't just planning to destroy me. They were prepared to sacrifice Sierra to cover their tracks. What do you need? I asked. A job, a reference, a way out of this mess that doesn't end with me getting sued or prosecuted. Done. But I need something in return. Sierra nodded, as if she'd been expecting this. I need copies of those emails, the calendar entries. Anything that shows this was a coordinated effort to defraud me. I can't just hand over confidential information. She's planning to throw you under the bus, I interrupted. You said so yourself. How confident are you that she'll protect you when things get difficult? Sierra was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. Finally, she looked up at me with something like resolve in her eyes. I'll need a few days to copy everything safely, and I'll need your word that you won't use this information to hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it. You have my word. We shook hands across the table, and I felt the balance of power shifting for the first time since this whole mess began. 2 days later, Sierra sent me an encrypted email with attachments that made my hands shake as I read them. Detailed plans for asset seizure, strategies for discrediting me publicly, even discussions about how to use my blue-collar background against me in court proceedings. But the most damaging document was a series of text exchanges between Vivienne and Trent that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship or their intentions toward me. Messages that ranged from coldly calculating to intimately personal, painting a clear picture of conspiracy and betrayal. I forwarded everything to Chloe, then called her to discuss strategy. This is good, she said after reviewing the files. Really good. Conspiracy to commit fraud, breach of fiduciary duty if we can prove Trent was representing both of you, plus evidence of adultery that would void any claims she might have on marital assets. What's our next move? We go public, but carefully. You don't want to look vindictive or like you're violating her privacy. This has to seem like you're defending yourself, not attacking her. I have an idea about that. That evening, I called a press conference at my construction site. Not the glamorous setting Vivienne would have chosen, but perfect for the image I wanted to project. Honest working man defending himself against false accusations. The turnout was better than I'd expected. Channel 7 was there, along with reporters from 2 newspapers and several bloggers who'd been following the story. I stood in front of a partially completed building, wearing clean work clothes and a hard hat, flanked by Mick and several of my crew. I called you here tonight, I began, because I believe in transparency. Over the past week, there have been allegations made about my character and my business practices. I want to address those allegations directly. I outlined the timeline of events, the prenup ambush, the immediate media campaign, the threats and intimidation. I presented documentation of my legitimate business practices and my clean financial records. And then, carefully and without editorial comment, I shared selected portions of Sierra's evidence. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Reporters started shouting questions about Vivienne's financial situation and her relationship with Trent. Cameras flashed as they photographed the documents I'd distributed. "I want to be clear," I concluded. "I don't take pleasure in sharing this information. But when someone tries to destroy your reputation and your livelihood based on lies, you have a right to defend yourself with the truth." I left without taking questions, but I could hear the feeding frenzy beginning behind me. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with calls from reporters who now wanted to hear my side of the story. I ignored them all and poured myself a whiskey in my study. Through the window, I could see lights in the mansion's guest wing where Vivienne had been staying since our confrontation. I wondered if she was watching the news coverage, seeing her carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. My phone rang. Trent's number. "Warren," he said when I answered. His voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "You're making a serious mistake." "Am I? Which part? Defending my reputation or exposing the truth? You don't understand the forces you're dealing with here. Vivienne's family has connections, resources, I interrupted. "Right. Is that what we're calling it when a lawyer helps his client's wife steal her husband's assets?" The line went quiet for a long moment. When Trent spoke again, his voice was different, less confident, more desperate. "This doesn't have to get uglier. We can still work something out, find a compromise that works for everyone." "The time for compromise was a week ago, before you decided to try and destroy me. Now we see how this plays out." I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway, Vivienne's Mercedes, moving fast enough to spray gravel. I watched from my study window as she got out and stormed toward the house, her perfect composure finally cracked. The front door slammed open, and I could hear her heels clicking across the marble floor as she headed straight for my study. "You bastard!" she said, bursting through the door without knocking. "How dare you humiliate me like that?" I looked up from my whiskey, taking in her appearance. Designer dress wrinkled, makeup smeared, hands shaking with rage. This was Vivienne stripped of her careful control, and it was not a pretty sight. "Humiliate you?" I asked calmly. "I just told the truth. If that's humiliating, maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to steal everything I've worked for. Those documents were private. You had no right." "I had every right to defend myself. You started this war, Vivienne. Don't cry now that you're losing it." She stood there for a moment, chest heaving, looking like she wanted to throw something. Then her expression changed, becoming calculating again. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea what's coming next." "Bring it on," I replied. "I'm not the same man you married 3 years ago. I've learned a few things about fighting in your world." After she left, I sat in my study for a long time, thinking about what she'd said. She was right about one thing: this wasn't over. But for the first time since this whole mess began, I felt like I was winning. The fallout from my press conference was swift and brutal. By morning, the story had exploded across social media and local news outlets. The Prenup gate was trending on Twitter, with thousands of people weighing in on what one blogger called the ultimate revenge of the underestimated husband. Vivienne's carefully cultivated image lay in ruins. Photos of her with Trent at expensive restaurants surfaced from social media accounts, now viewed through the lens of adultery and conspiracy. The country club crowd that had once hung on her every word was now dissecting her financial troubles with the ruthless efficiency of a pack of wolves. But I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. The counterattack came at noon, delivered by a process server who handed me papers for a restraining order. According to the documents, I was a dangerous and unstable individual who had threatened my wife and violated her privacy. The order prohibited me from contacting her directly or coming within 500 feet of her person. "Clever," Chloe said when I showed her the papers. "She's trying to control the narrative again, make you look like the aggressor." Will it work? Not with the evidence we have, but it complicates things. We need to be extra careful about how we proceed. That afternoon brought more complications. A black sedan with government plates pulled up to my construction site, and two men in expensive suits got out. They flashed badges and asked to speak with me privately. "Mr. Warren," the older one said, "I'm Agent Morrison, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We've received allegations about potential tax evasion and financial misconduct related to your business operations." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of allegations?" "Anonymous tips suggesting you've been mixing personal and business expenses, underreporting income, possibly hiding assets offshore. We're going to need to examine your records." I looked at Mick, who was standing nearby, with barely concealed hostility. This was Vivienne's nuclear option, using the government to tie up my assets and destroy my business while she regrouped. "I'll cooperate fully," I said. "My accountant can provide whatever you need. But I want to be clear, this is harassment, pure and simple. I'm in the middle of a contentious divorce and my wife is using every weapon she can find." Agent Morrison's expression didn't change. "We investigate all credible allegations, Mr. Warren. The source doesn't matter if the information is accurate." They spent 3 hours going through my files, copying documents and asking pointed questions about specific transactions. I answered everything honestly, knowing my books were clean, but understanding that the investigation itself was the real weapon. By the time they left, word had spread. Clients were calling with concerns about my legal situation. Suppliers were demanding immediate payment on outstanding invoices. The media was portraying the IRS visit as confirmation that there might be substance to Vivienne's claims. I was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and she was winning. That evening, I met Danny Reeves at a diner outside town. He had news that might change the balance. "Your wife made a mistake," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "She's been so focused on attacking you that she forgot to cover her own tracks." Inside the envelope were photographs and documents that made me smile for the first time in days. Bank records showing large cash withdrawals from accounts in the Cayman Islands. Photos of Vivienne meeting with a man Danny had identified as a money laundering specialist. Evidence of financial transactions that would be very difficult to explain to the IRS. "She's been hiding money," Danny explained. "Probably skimming from her family's charitable foundation to fund her lifestyle. The amounts aren't huge, but it's definitely fraud." "How did you get this?" "The same investigator she hired to dig into your finances got sloppy. Left his laptop unattended at a coffee shop, and someone with the right skills happened to be nearby." I looked through the documents again, feeling that cold calculation settling in my chest. Vivienne had tried to use the government against me. Now I had ammunition to return the favor. "What's your advice?" I asked. "Use it carefully. This kind of information is powerful, but it's also dangerous. You don't want to look like you're escalating things beyond reason." I thought about the restraining order, the IRS investigation, the systematic destruction of my reputation. Escalating beyond reason. We'd passed that point days ago. The next morning, I called a meeting with Vivienne's parents at their estate in the Hamptons. Charles and Margaret Archer were old money personified, the kind of people who measured success in generations rather than years. They'd never approved of their daughter's marriage to a construction worker, but they'd tolerated me for the sake of family harmony. That tolerance was about to be tested. I arrived at their estate with a briefcase full of evidence and a carefully prepared presentation. They received me in their library, surrounded by leather-bound books and portraits of distinguished ancestors. "Eliot," Charles said stiffly, "we appreciate you coming, but given the current circumstances, we're not sure this meeting is appropriate." "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say," I replied, opening my briefcase. "It concerns your daughter's activities and their potential impact on your family's reputation." For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything. The conspiracy with Trent, the hidden financial problems, the evidence of fraud involving their charitable foundation. I watched their expressions change from skeptical to shocked to coldly furious. "You're saying," Margaret said slowly, "that Vivienne has been stealing from the foundation?" "The evidence speaks for itself. Small amounts over time, but consistent. And the money went to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford while planning to defraud me of my legitimate assets." Charles studied the bank records with the attention of someone who'd built his fortune on careful financial management. These transactions, they would trigger automatic reporting requirements. If the IRS is investigating you, they'll inevitably discover this as well. "Unless someone brings it to their attention first," I said carefully. "Someone with standing and credibility who could frame it as cooperation rather than investigation." The implication hung in the air between us. They could sacrifice their daughter to protect the family name and fortune, or they could risk having everything dragged through a public scandal. "What do you want?" Margaret asked. "I want this to end. The harassment, the false accusations, the attempts to destroy my business. I want a clean divorce, with no claims on assets either of us brought to the marriage, and I want assurance that there won't be any retaliation." Charles and Margaret exchanged a look that communicated volumes about their marriage and their priorities. "We'll need time to consider this," Charles said finally. "Of course, but not too much time. The IRS investigation is moving forward, and I can't control what they might discover on their own." I left them with copies of the most damaging documents and drove back to the city, feeling like I'd just lit a very long fuse. The explosion came sooner than I expected. That evening, Vivienne called me from her parents' estate. The restraining order prohibited me from contacting her, but it said nothing about her contacting me. "You went to my parents," she said. Her voice was different, smaller, defeated. "I shared some information that concerned them. They're cutting me off, completely. No more trust fund, no more support, nothing." "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not. This is what you wanted." I thought about that. Was it what I wanted? To see the woman I'd once loved stripped of everything, abandoned by her own family, facing criminal charges? "What I wanted," I said finally, "was to be treated with respect, to have my work and my contributions valued, to not be seen as just a convenient source of funding for your lifestyle." "It doesn't have to be like this," she said, and for a moment she sounded like the woman I'd married. "We could still work something out, find a way to end this without destroying each other." "You should have thought of that before you tried to destroy me." "Eli, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go back to how things were." "No," I said quietly. "We can't. Too much has happened. Too many lies, too much betrayal. It's over, Vivienne." The line went quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and hard. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. I guess we'll find out." After she hung up, I sat in my study and tried to feel something. Victory, satisfaction, regret. Instead, I felt empty. The war was almost over, but the cost had been higher than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Trent just withdrew from representing Vivienne. Word is he's hiring his own lawyer." The coalition was crumbling. When the pressure got too intense, they were abandoning each other with the same ruthless calculation they'd once directed at me. I poured myself a whiskey and looked out at the grounds of the mansion. My mansion, whatever happened next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks, new attempts to destroy what I'd built. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The final confrontation came at the annual Archer Foundation charity gala, held at the country club where Vivienne had once reigned as social royalty. I hadn't planned to attend. The restraining order technically prohibited it, but circumstances had changed dramatically in the past 48 hours. Vivienne's parents had moved fast once they understood the full scope of their daughter's activities. They'd contacted the IRS themselves, presenting evidence of the foundation fraud as a family matter they were addressing proactively. They'd also had their lawyers file papers dissolving the restraining order, claiming it had been obtained under false pretenses. Most importantly, they'd made it clear that Vivienne was no longer welcome in their home or their social circle. I arrived at the gala fashionably late, wearing the same tuxedo I'd worn to our wedding 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Chloe accompanied me as my guest, looking elegant in a black dress that concealed the small recording device she carried. The reaction to our entrance was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as heads turned to track our progress across the ballroom. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes, the whispered speculation, the barely contained excitement of people who sensed they were about to witness something memorable. Vivienne stood near the bar, surrounded by the remnants of her social circle. She looked stunning as always, but there was something desperate in her posture, a brittleness that hadn't been there before. Trent was nowhere to be seen. According to Chloe's sources, he'd fled to his family's cabin in Vermont, hoping to avoid the legal reckoning that was coming. "Eli?" Bianca intercepted us near the dance floor, her smile bright and predatory. "How brave of you to show up tonight, after everything that's happened." "Everything that's happened," I repeated. "You mean the truth coming out?" Her smile flickered. Over the past week, Bianca's role in spreading false information had become public knowledge. Several of her closest friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone who'd been so publicly wrong about such a spectacular scandal. "Well," she said, recovering her composure, "I suppose we'll see how it all turns out in court." "Actually," I said, "I don't think we will." Before she could ask what I meant, I walked away, heading directly toward Vivienne's group. The crowd parted before me like I was carrying something contagious. "Hello, Vivienne," I said when I reached her. "You look lovely tonight." She turned to face me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before: genuine fear. Not of physical harm, but of complete social destruction. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. "Same thing as everyone else. Supporting charity. Speaking of which, I understand there have been some irregularities with the foundation's finances." The group around her shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in this room knew about money, understood its power and its dangers. The suggestion of financial impropriety was like mentioning a communicable disease. "I don't know what you're talking about," Vivienne said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Of course you don't. Just like you didn't know about the private investigator, or the media campaign, or the conspiracy to defraud me of my assets." "You're delusional," she said, but the people around her were already stepping back, creating distance between themselves and potential scandal. I pulled out my phone and opened the audio recording app. "Would you like to hear the conversation you had with Trent last week? The one where you discussed framing me for domestic violence?" Her face went pale beneath her makeup. "You can't record private conversations without consent." "Actually, I can. New York is a one-party consent state, and I was a party to that conversation." I looked around at the faces surrounding us, seeing fascination and horror in equal measure. "Would you like me to play it for everyone?" "Don't," she whispered. "Then let's go somewhere private and finish this." I led her to a small conference room off the main ballroom, with Chloe following as witness. Vivienne's remaining supporters trailed behind, unable to resist the gravitational pull of a scandal this juicy. In the privacy of the conference room, I laid out the final terms of our divorce: clean separation, no claims on each other's assets, mutual non-disclosure agreements to prevent further public embarrassment. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges for the conspiracy or provide additional evidence to federal investigators. "You're blackmailing me," she said. "I'm offering you a way out of a situation that will only get worse if it continues. The IRS investigation is expanding. Trent is cooperating with authorities to reduce his own exposure. Your parents have disowned you." How much worse do you want this to get? She looked around the room at the faces watching her, former friends who were now spectators at her downfall, social climbers who were already calculating how to distance themselves from her disgrace. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I turn everything over to the prosecutors and let them sort it out. I stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Vivienne, I did love you once. I would have given you everything willingly if you'd just asked instead of trying to steal it. The next morning, Sierra delivered the signed divorce papers to my office. Along with them came a handwritten note from Vivienne. You win. I hope it was worth it. I sat in my office for a long time after Sierra left, holding the papers that officially ended my marriage. Outside, I could hear the sounds of construction, my crew working on the project that would determine my company's future. Life going on, despite the drama that had consumed the past month. My phone rang. Chloe. It's over, I told her. She signed everything. How do you feel? I thought about that question. How did I feel? Victorious? Vindicated? Empty? Tired, I said finally. I feel tired. That's normal. You've been fighting for weeks. Now you can rest. But I wasn't sure I could rest. The war was over, but the battlefield was littered with casualties, relationships destroyed, reputations ruined, trust broken beyond repair. I'd won, but the victory felt hollow. That evening I drove to the mansion one last time before putting it on the market. The house felt different now, emptied of the dreams and hopes I'd once invested in it. It was just a building again, expensive and impressive but no longer a home. In my study I poured a final whiskey and looked out at the grounds where I'd once imagined raising children, hosting family gatherings, building a life with someone I thought I knew. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news. Proud of you for fighting back. An old friend. I smiled for the first time in days. Maybe the victory wasn't as hollow as I'd thought. Maybe standing up for yourself, refusing to be destroyed by people who saw you as expendable, was worth something after all. I finished my whiskey, locked up the house, and drove away without looking back. Tomorrow I would start rebuilding, not just my business and my reputation, but my life. The war was over, and I had survived. That was enough.